to this webinar. I'm Chris Cook. I'm one of the solutions architects here at Hawkridge Systems. So I tend to work with your account managers and on the kind of the front end to figure out what solutions makes most sense for the challenges that you face. Get Andy Rammer joining me today as the moderator in the background. So have questions and those sorts of things, he'll be the one fielding those and bringing them to my attention. So today we're going to go through the top 3 SOLIDWORKS Manage features, Supercharge engineering BOMs. The bills of materials seem like a simple thing, but there's a lot of common questions and a lot of nuance and complexity that gets thrown in. So we want to look at 3 features within Manage that really address a lot of common challenges that come up. It's going to be a fairly technical presentation. My aim is to kind of bounce back and forth between the PowerPoint slides where we kind of summarize the different points and then the live environment where we're going to take a look at these features. So big picture agenda today, the three key features. First is going to be advanced BOM structures. And this is where we're going to spend most of the presentation. Actually, a lot of detail there, and so how we build these bills of materials, where we get all the information for them, that sort of thing, all gets rolled into that. Then we'll look at BOM variants, which are kind of unique to Manage. We don't have those in SOLIDWORKS or PDM. And finally, BOM reports. Reports is a huge topic. We could spend hours going through reports and going through all the details. So we'll just show some examples and some kind of technical where you get to them, how you edit them, that sort of thing, and what some of the options are going to be for those. All right, so I'll jump into the first major section here, advanced BOM structures. We're going to hit kind of 4 areas. We're going to look at PDM and how its BOMs relate to Manage, then where we can edit and manage these things, look at how we get other content in there, and finally how we can look at them. So I've numbered all of these, so later on when you download the PDF, it'll be kind of connected. So initially, when we're talking about PDM BOMs, really talking about the computed BOM, right? So every time you do a check-in in PDM, for those of you, most of you are familiar with, that version of that assembly or whatever that document happens to be in PDM will have a bill of materials created for it. That happens, based on all of the references that PDM understands. So not just the SOLIDWORKS references, but if you use the paste as reference and attach other things to it, those will show up in there as well. And then Manage automatically gets those. So there's I'll do a little tour of Manage when we get in here. You kind of get an idea of how it's laid out and structured. But when you enable the bill of materials feature for the PDM record, the SOLIDWORKS data just kind of comes in. That's usually the default, and so those are pretty automatic, right? Any check-in in PDM is going to give you updated BOMs and Manage. They do support both virtual documents and internal components. So virtual documents being, the Kinesio virtual documents, the CVD file, where you just tell it what the extension is so that you can determine what which data card it uses. Right? So we use those for different things. Sometimes we use them for change documents and things like that, but you can use them for whatever you want. So they're not uncommon to use them for non-modeled components. So those are going to show up, of course, in PDM because they're a PDM item, but they will also show up in Manage. And it also will support the internal components. So if you drop a component in your SOLIDWORKS assembly and you save it internally, so it's not an external pointer to an outside file, those also will show up, and we'll see what those look like. And I made a quick note here about hide and promote. SOLIDWORKS has had that as an option for a long time in configurations. So you could right-click your SOLIDWORKS assembly configuration and decide how the child components behave in a bill of materials. Is the assembly hidden and all the components roll up? Just because sometimes you call those convenience assemblies, or where they make sense in CAD and in modeling, but they aren't an assembly that you're going to want to show up, upstream in ERP or anything. And then there's that would be a promote. And then hide is most commonly, for kind of non-modeled off-the-shelf stuff where you don't necessarily need to see all the component parts, but it should all be treated as a single item. So SOLIDWORks or PDM and supported the hide function for a long time, but in 2021 they actually added support for promote now as well. So that may start showing up in your BOMs as you guys begin upgrading. I know we're doing a lot more 2021 upgrades now as we approach the end of that release cycle. So I want to kind of jump into manage and take a peek at it. I'm just going to minimize this for a moment. So there's a client that runs on your desktop. Manage has a couple of different clients you can use. It has a web one as well as the desktop. They both, unlike the PDM web client, the managed web clients actually look exactly like the desktop client. The only difference is they don't have any of the administrative functions available. So when you log in, you'll get some different options. Manage environments actually support connecting to more than one PDM vault. So when you tell it you're going to connect to a managed instance, a managed database, you get to just look at which vaults are there that you can connect to. You can pick your client type. That follows the same strategy as PDM, so that you've got editor, contributor, and viewer licenses. And that does it does factor in here on the BOM management side of things. So if you want to use manage as that environment where a team outside of the mechanical engineers that are developing the hardware are going to manage BOMs, they don't necessarily need to be an editor because they aren't going to be checking out necessarily SOLIDWORKS CAD documents. If they're just doing BOM work, they might be, leverage a contributor license instead. And then you've got a whole bunch of colorful interface options depending on how you like to see your interfaces. I'm going to use the kind of the standard colorful one. I kind of prefer dark backgrounds, but for the presentations, I'll keep it light. And so I'm going to log in. I'm going to switch back and forth between this and SOLIDWORKS so you kind of get an idea of how the licenses interact, I think. And there was a question if SOLIDWORKS Manage was a separate installer. No, actually, it's all included in the same massive download that you get when you're upgrading your SOLIDWORKS. So it's the server components are installed through the same package. It has its own client installer, but it's also part of that download as well. So that's a good question. So this is the interface. There are on the lower left some main sections to look at, and you have control as a user to decide how you want this thing to launch. Often it's nice to launch into the My Work section where you can filter on documents, projects, or processes that are already checked out to you, or tasks that might be waiting for you. Today we're going to be focusing on the documents and records section. So I'm just going to start at the top level here and kind of give you an idea of what types of records I have. And it's SOLIDWORKS Manage came into the fold a few years ago, but it's been around for a very long time. Probably as long as SOLIDWORKS PDM was around, before SOLIDWORKS purchased it in 2006. And so it's got a pretty deep integration as we'll see. So under these record types, I've got 4 of them. I've got ones for just BOMs, and these again are just, they're their own kind of record. We can define our own properties for them, and we can decide what kinds of other records and objects can go into those bills of materials. And we'll kind of look at those, how those are structured in a little bit. I've got library components, which are like my non-modeled component library. I've got a whole bunch of electronics, as well as some commodities and packaging and things like that. And you can organize and create your records any way you like. I've got one here for linked BOMs, and we'll look at that when we go into, where should we start managing our BOM information. But they become a special record type that's linked back to their parent. And then finally, I've got this green one, this manage vault. Right, so this is what we call our vault record. And it's going to have the same structure that you would see if you're browsing around in it inside PDM. Same project structures. This one's organized by designs and libraries and templates. So all my designs have these recurring structures. What's nice about this this sort of interface is it's all kind of SQL driven in the background, and so I can set up filters. So right at the top level, I can click on a filter and get just assemblies, or just things that are checked out to me, or whatever you want to filter on. It makes it nice and quick for jumping in. So if we select something on the right, just like we have in PDM, where we break up the window in files and folders on top and vault data on the bottom, same kind of thing here with manage. Select a record on top, and it gives me manage information at the bottom. So if I want to see how this plays with PDM, I can right click and show in Windows Explorer. The green folder kind of is my clue that that's taken me to PDM. And I've got it open already, I think. Yeah. And so in PDM, we'll have a SOLIDWORKS Manage tab. So we can see the manage properties, which we can control kind of independent of the PDM properties. So here, you could be augmenting your data card information. The properties in manage are pretty robust, and they can have hierarchical lists and lookups, and reach out to other systems to pull data. It's pretty sophisticated there. And then we've got our BOMs. And so I bring this up because as a SOLIDWORKS user who's checking in and checking out your CAD files, this is likely where you're going to do the bulk of your work. Right? And you'll probably interact with manage from here quite a bit as well. So the where use tabs here for manage will tell you if a component that you're selected is used in any bills of materials or any processes. So if you're using manage to do your change requests and that sort of thing, or tying them to projects, those will all be listed here as well. So the next question, if you're going to start editing these bills of materials and building them up, what's the best place to do that? So I've got 3 listed here. The PDM record directly, linked records, which I kind of showed in the tree there, and then the BOM records. And there's pros and cons for doing each of these routes. So I want to kind of lay them out here. So anything underneath this manage vault tree structure is interacting directly with the documents that are sitting in PDM. So if I want to go into this bill of materials and modify it, I have to check out that document. So let's pull up an assembly. I don't believe this one's checked out. No. So if I want to open that BOM, right, I can open it here, and you can see a checkout option, right? So I'd have to check that out to open it. And so you get the checkout dialog box, which we normally see there in PDM. So this actually has to check out that assembly in order for me to edit the bill of materials. That may be fine if your the engineering team is responsible for making sure that the BOM is complete. That may work just fine. It might be the best approach to go. But if you want to need some level of separation, maybe you don't start working on the BOM until it's released, and then there's a different group that really needs to manage that because they've got supplier content that needs to go in or manufacturing content, then it should really go somewhere else. And that's where our other two record types come into play. A linked BOM is sort of an automated thing where we would just right click and say, I want to go to linked records and create one. And that creates a record that has the exact same part number, but just in a different record object. So these two were just assemblies that I created as linked records using that right click. And there's a column for primary reference, so you can look back and see, you know, is it up to date or not? And that's where the little question mark pops in. All right. And you can click and kind of go back and forth to those. So this one's actually checked out to me. So if I look at it, this linked to BOM column now is filled out with the kind of the parent document where it came from. And if you click on that link, it brings up a comparison. So you can see a BOM compare between the original and the one that you're in to see if anything's changed or different. And if you want to flatten it and just look at it a pure flat view, you can do that there, and you can export the results to Excel. Actually pulls out a 3-sheet Excel, so you'll have one for each record and then one that's kind of the combined, you know, what's different. So what's nice about this is the check-in and check-out is independent then of the source document underneath it. So if I want to do all my edits to this bill of materials and not have to have checkout rights to the assembly itself, this would be one way to do it, and then keep them very tightly linked. Our third option is to just have another record type. In this case, I just called it BOMs. I actually have 3 different types of BOMs, and I've got filters to show them. But these can have, you know, pretty much anything you want in the BOM. So they may have absolutely nothing, and you just start building them from scratch. That's how these actually work. So they aren't tied to anything specific up front, but you can then, you know, build whatever you want. And so we're going to look at how we bring data into a bill of materials in the next section, and that will, then we've got some options for how we do that. So again, these now would be completely independent, not even linked back necessarily like the linked BOM, but a totally unique record. And then the controls in Manage are very granular, so you can decide which of these need to go to processes for being approved and that sort of thing. All right, so that kind of brings us to adding content to the BOM. All right, so we know in PDM, by add references, you know, paste as reference, do those copies, those will show up in the PDM BOM. Those are already going to come in to manage. So what else would I need to add? And so really common to add, you know, non-modeled components. As we saw in Manage, we have got a list of things, you know, like your packing materials, could be grease, could be paint, could be just about anything, really. Just depends on what you want to put in your BOM. So you could have records for if you want to go sort of the manufacturing route and have, you know, workstations or machines or, you know, different, you know, other records that may make sense to attach and have shown in a special type of BOM. You'll have complete granular control over that. Mention CAD items in here because there's a really interesting workflow that we're going to look at that can tie the kind of BOM editing into, you know, the modeling that you do in CAD. And we'll also look at just some text items in case you need to just put some notes in the bill of materials as line items, but they aren't tracked against any record. And then Excel imports. So I'm gonna come down to one of these bills of materials. As a matter of fact, I think I'll pick a different one over here. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna check this out. So again, if we want to edit a BOM, we got to check it out. I'm just going to check out this assembly. And I can choose to right click and just open the record. That brings up another UI. another screen that's just exclusively for this assembly and its information. So note, we've got this thumbnail that shows up. That happens every time I check in and manage. Right? It's gonna invokes the PDM's API to generate a thumbnail to make sure it's up to date. That was added a couple of years ago. If I go down to my bill of materials, this is where I can tell it I want to edit the BOM. So in addition to checking it out, I do have to specifically tell it on the BOM that I want to edit it. Otherwise, my add options don't light up. So I'll hit edit. And now I have different ways to go pull information. And when we define these bills of materials as the administrator, we get to tell it where they can pull information. So if I want to kind of compartmentalize how the BOM's built up so that PDM records like the one I'm working with here can only have other PDM objects, I can do that. And then allow a different bill of materials, maybe a linked BOM or another one, to have more records that can pull from. Right? Again, that's just going to depend on our organizational structure and if that makes sense for our teams. So if I want to add something here, then I can just go up to my my add and remove section, and add and add simple kind of do the same thing, just in a slightly different UI. Add simple brings up a kind of simplified UI with just a few options versus whatever objects that I've said can be in here. So if I want to bring in library components, that would be like my electronic stuff, my packing, my cardboard boxes and that sort of thing, then I can switch to that source. You can always search. You've got filters across the top, so you can search basically within any column. So if I want a box, just start to type box, right, and it filters that down. So when I select something, I don't have to put a checkbox in here. I know it looks like a box there, but I don't really need that. Select my quantity, a little calculator that can pop up, or you can just type in a number, and then add and close, closes the biolog box. You can just hit add, it'll keep it open, and you can pick more components. So these are coded as far as their icons go. This is a SOLIDWORKS part versus a just another record type. If I want to add, I can add SOLIDWORKS components. So if I use the add this time instead of add simple, right? So this is the more complex UI, but it lets me drill down through my entire documents and records tree structure to find what I want. So if I wanted to go pick on parts, I can go do something like that. Grab a part, grab something that makes absolutely no sense for this assembly, but that's all right. And add that rotor there. I'll just say I want to add and close, and I can add that SOLIDWORKS assembly. So you can actually go in and make changes to the BOM level here, and we'll see how SOLIDWORKS deals with that on the other side. One of the other entries that we can put in here is a text line. So it's going to have a blue diamond instead of a yellow one. The yellow one represents, an actual record that's managed by the managed system, versus a text line, which is just text. Right? So it could be instructions, it could be, anything that it needs to be. Right? I'll just put some, a note in there. You'll have options for doing, cut, copy, and paste, items within your BOM structure. This is just a single level one, but if I had multiple level ones, you're going to see this dissolve option. But if it's a SOLIDWORKS assembly, it's not going to let you dissolve it. And that's where we're going to get into different ways that you could build a BOM in other places. So I'm going to save this one as it is. And I'm going to go to check that in. And I'm going to open this in SOLIDWORKS. So when I right click and hit open, brings up that tree. If I can check it out if I want, has the, getting open, do I want to include drawings? No. I can always check it out when I've got it open already, but just want to open it and kind of show you something that pops up in the interface that's kind of new to 2021. That could be a value on how you guys go around about planning changes or building up designs. So you guys are probably already familiar with the SOLIDWORKS tab, right, where you can do all your check in and check out and see the status. Manage will have a tab as well. So if I have something open, I'm going to see its structure shown here. It's a long, complicated structure. I can use the hide show filter to kind of drill down through it. Right, shows me a lot of the same information I'm used to seeing in the browser. It goes pretty wide there. You guys are probably using multiple monitors, so you've got more real estate to look at here. But there's a new item in the bottom here where it says manually added files. So that rotor that I dropped in there is in there. And if I want to add that to my design and go mate it somewhere, then I just grab it from that list and drop it in here. Now, I don't have this checked out, so I'm not going to worry about doing that here, but just want to point that out because that could be a pretty interesting workflow if you guys are doing change management and using the BOMs as a way to kind of govern what's supposed to happen with that design. All right, and I'm gonna go check this out one more time. And I'm gonna bring in some more data. It's really common to want to have design teams that work outside of mechanical, that do electrical or electronics or some other form of design that contributes to the overall product, and that information needs to get incorporated somehow. Let's see. Oh no, I don't have it here. I think I did it up here. There we are. So we can import bills of materials from Excel. Oh, nope, I did have it in the right place. My apologies. We'll edit that one here. And I'm going to bring it in here. So we set up a template in here that just basically gives you a mapping. What columns are going to be in this Excel file? How do those get mapped into the areas inside Manage? And then what happens to those if the components already exist? Do we just bump the quantities? Do we clear the existing data that's in there? Do I leave it alone? Do I overwrite? Right, so you have some options there. So I've got a really simple BOM here for import. You can pick what sheet you want to bring in. If you got ranges, you can do that. But then you get to preview it, and it gives you a list of those items that are in this BOM. And again, I just used a simple one here for an example. But what will happen is it's going to look at the part number and the description, the kind of the key information you've put in there, and see if those things exist in any of the managed record types. So these are all going to get added as records. So these are all going to be those yellow squares, except for that one. That one was an actual SOLIDWORKS part, so it gets a part icon. So just like we saw before with SOLIDWORKS, we could open that up, drag and drop that in, made it up in our design, and do it that way as well. So if you have a kind of a mix, you get a electronics BOM, for example, where the wires and stuff are just records, they're not models, but the connectors are models and they go in, but it's kind of some mix. Doesn't care. It'll just grab them from wherever those records exist and connect them properly that way. So it's pretty powerful application that can help, again, just kind of complete the contents of that bill of materials. So I'll just save and check that in. All right, I think before I move on to the next section, I think I want to look at some of these questions. Hopefully I answered the how do you invoke SOLIDWORKS Manage. I've got an icon sitting on my desktop for it, but if you log into PDM, you can also have a connection there with your Manage tab. So you kind of end up logging into both at the same time. If depending on when the records are actually available, they don't have to show up in Manage right away. It can actually be part of the workflow trigger so that maybe you don't want Manage to know about any of the CAD data until it gets released, and at which point now it shows up in Manage. So you've got a lot of flexibility there. Want to go into more of a full-on demo for that? We'd be happy to set something up there to kind of dive into that a little more deeper. So what's the difference between SOLIDWORKS Manage and PDM? They're actually two separate systems with a deep integration component. Manage was brought in a few years ago. Again, it's been around for a long time, but to kind of fill in some of the functionality that's typically found in a PLM system, but didn't make sense to have in PDM as a core product, but something that a lot of the PDM users needed. So, item management, things that are not necessarily documents or that kind of thing. It's set up well to do that. Processes, and that instead of every document needing to live in a workflow, processes kind of have a beginning and an end, right? So you could have an ECO process that starts, goes through, gathers information, can automate some outputs, and then trigger other processes if you want. So it's just a totally different architecture for dealing with, any kind of business process, but definitely at a higher level than PDM, but with an integration to PDM. So you can use those state changes that happen in the manage process to change states in PDM, so that one ends up kind of controlling the other. It also adds project management with Gantt charts and planning and that sort of thing, as well as we'll see with reports a little later. A lot of dashboard and kind of overview data that can be really valuable to an organization. One of the areas where PDM, I guess the reason some customers don't use the PDM BOM as the place to manage is that because they can't then take that BOM easily and put it on the SOLIDWORKS drawing, because they may want it there. You actually have that option in Manage. I don't have an example of it here to show, unfortunately, but it is part of the setup. You can tell it where on the drawing do you want the bill of materials to show, and some settings around how that's displayed, and you can actually put the Manage BOM on your SOLIDWORKS drawing. So that may kind of help push towards using that as a kind of the central place to manage it, and let the drawing then reflect what Manage says. But great questions. All right, let's display options. So we looked at how we add things into the BOM, but then if we want to look do some, look at the BOM in different ways. We have some options in PDM, right? We can look at the indented BOM, we can look at it parts only, we can look at just a single level. It's a little less, fewer options here with Manage, but some of them are ones that get asked for every day. I guess like I almost daily get an email or a phone call and somebody asking about this. So if I want to see the whole structure, right, it defaults to the top level, but you can always expand anything you want. You can actually go into the tools, I believe it is, and say expand all and just mass expand the entire tree if you want. You actually have an option in here if you have a huge tree and you want to get a little more granular at different levels. There's a grid display, right? And you're like, well, this will look a lot different. But now if I do a subassembly, then I've got a different grid here. And the reason they do that is that you can then control at this individual level which columns are showing and which components are showing. You can kind of filter out components. So if you have some need to kind of specialize how it looks, you could do the grid view there. But the one that comes up the most is our good old flat view. And by flat, Manage doesn't care if it's got a SOLIDWORKS assembly extension or a part extension, it doesn't matter. It's just going to take the entire thing, all the unique records in here, and roll up their quantities. So you have one big flat bill of materials. And we'll see this pop up again with the reports, because it can report on them either way. So that gives you a great way to kind of filter out different types of components. And speaking of filtering, you've got a filter up here where if I select it, it puts basically search boxes, kind of filter boxes at the top of each row. So if I wanted to filter on some content, I just start typing in that row and limits what I see. And then a big one that gets asked all the time is, can I put my thumbnails in there? And then the answer is, yeah, I can just pick the button there and see all the thumbnails for all the components. Now for SOLIDWORKS stuff, as I said, when you check those in through Manage, it goes out and generates those thumbnails. But for non-PDM documents, like the other records, like our commodity things here, those you will have to actually create an image for it. And just on the properties tab, you add an image when you have it checked out to show what it is. But you can show those here and we can report on them. They'll pop up in numerous places. All right, next section. Looks like we're getting pretty close, so we'll probably go through these last two fairly quickly. BOM variants. So what you may have noticed as we had the different BOMs open is there were different tabs. These tabs are what we call variants. And the idea is that in Manage, I can have different variations of the BOM attached to the same record. When I create something from scratch, I'm gonna come up to my BOMs here and just create one. Brand new BOM. This one's asking me which type because they have what we call I'll just do a default one here. Save it. And now I can go to my bill of materials. These particular records have 3 different variants. In this case, US, EU, and Canada. The idea being maybe we have different variations for different regions that we sell in. Bunch of different use cases. But that's when I hit that edit button, you'll notice that the other 2 tabs then grayed out. So if I want to add content and do modifications, I'm only doing it on one variant at a time. But I can copy from other variants later. So let's say I bring something in here. I want to bring in an assembly. And this comes kind of again speaks to purpose and what you're going to do with that bill of materials. But if I want to modify the structure of it, like it's a multi-level assembly, it's got sub-assemblies and sub-assemblies, and I want to be able to dissolve those and change the way they are, then I'm going to use the copy from option and just take a snapshot of that architecture and then tear it apart. Whereas if I just add it, it's going to maintain the structure as that record requires it to. So that's sort of the nuance between copy from versus add. So if I do a copy from, I'm not going to copy from this record, I'll get another record, go select our different objects. And these BOMs, I can bring them from just about anywhere. I'll grab one of these. And this is where I can decide if I copy them, do I want to keep it linked to the source and have it update, right? If I don't, if I just want it as a snapshot and then I want to tear it apart and I don't want it linked back, I can keep that cleared, just pull it in. Right? That gives me that BOM structure as it came from that other component. And I'll save that. Now, if I go to another tab, another variant, and I say I want to edit that variant now, I can do a copy from, and I can copy from this within this same record. So I can just bring in from the US variant and start with what I did on the other tab. Right? And I can keep building up what's common and then go back and edit them and add in what's different. And so that's really kind of where the power of these variants come in, is it allows me to get, change all the components that might be different in different applications, different regions, and different regulatory bodies, whatever the case may be. So when you do link them, they will actually tell you where they came from. So you've got these BOM sources here. This one says it came from SOLIDWORKS. That one came from SOLIDWORKS. So if you're using a variant in one particular case, you can use that same variant later on in other places. I think some of these may have had different, right. So my US one, I had general items that were imported. This one came from the SOLIDWORKS variant. This one came from its manufacturing variant, right? And then I haven't put anything in its Canadian variant yet. Oops, wow, too many clicks. All right, so sometimes you may default to the wrong one or bring in, or want to change the variant or the source later on. Really, it's just a matter of editing that BOM. This one's checked out to me. I just edit it, and then I can go in and right-click the component that I have, and I just change the BOM source. So if I want to pull in what the manufacturing data is instead of the SOLIDWORKS data, I can do that. You can also, at this point, change configurations. So if you're swapping out the configurations of components you're putting into your BOMs, which again might make more sense when you're building up BOMs outside of the actual SOLIDWORKS data. You're just using that data. This gives you control over what you're showing. And a question, does each variant BOM get a newly generated file name, or how is it distinguished during the exports? All the exports, again, are going out as XML file, and everything about that XML is going to be configurable, including how it's named. So you're going to define, which variant are you pushing out during that export settings. So all of that will be kind of handled in a couple of places. One in the XML template that you generate itself, and then also in the export setup itself. You're going to get different iconography when it comes to updating and change propagation. Looks like we're running a little late, so I'm not going to go in and show these necessarily, but you'll see them right in the tree. Kind of like we see, in PDM and SOLIDWORKS, you get the color coding. Same kind of thing happens here. And you actually have a lot of conditional highlighting that you can do both in bills of materials just and in the grid itself. So you can make these stand out even more than just the icons that are shown. So the final section I wanted to get into was the reports. And the reports are really where I kind of take this information and then I format it in a way that I can save out as a PDF or load up on a website or push out somewhere that's not going out as like an XML data exchange sort of format, more of a user presentable format. So actually, I'll just run through the slides real quick and then I'll show you where they are and we can look at some of them. So on a multi-level BOM, you'll get the items and the item levels that'll show up, and then you can decide when you're building these kind of what's shown in the grid, including the thumbnails. So those can be in there. One little trick to those when we're editing them is you may want to just create, if you don't have an assembly that's super deep, like that your assemblies are commonly 8 levels deep. You want a sample assembly then when you're building this report that is 8 levels deep, so that you'll have all of the different reference levels to pull from as you're building it up. So it may be worth creating even just a dummy assembly that just goes really, really deep to do that. We can also do them flat. And again, show them images, quantities, and again, you can just roll them up. You'll have a calculated quantity that's done based as part of the flat calculation that it does behind the scenes. And there's a whole bunch of advanced functions you can do in there. Cost roll-ups was a question that popped up earlier in the discussion. So yes, you can actually do that. So here I've got an example of one where I have the cost and the quantity, and then I created an extended cost where I just multiply the two out at the end. And then at the bottom of that, I can tally up the items. So if it's like a shipping report and I want to know how many items are in the box, then that's a good number to have. And then if I want the costs in there too, I can just roll up the costs that were shown there as well. So the way we get to these, and these can be automated so that they're kicked out as a part of a process. So if I want to do a BOM and send it to a release, and at the end of that release, it generates these reports, I can do that. But really, you right-click on demand, and you can just say run report. And whatever reports you've defined for this BOM type will show up here. So this one's got a shipping report that is a flat BOM type. It supports barcoding, and these I used the QR code option here, but there's a whole, I don't know, like 20 or 30 different coding schemas if you're using barcodes that you can actually throw on these reports. So whether it's an item report, like for individual component, or in this case it's a BOM report, you can have those barcodes in there. And so this gives you the output. You can print it, you can save it, you can export it to a bunch of different file formats. If I want to actually edit one, then what I have to do is open the record, go over to my reports tab, and this is where I can use configure. So if I go down to that shipping report where we had our roll-ups and hit configure, it's going to bring up the report editor interface. And so this is, boy, it's pretty vanilla, a Dev Express report manager. I can't remember what the name of the product is, but tons of info out there on YouTube on Dev Express on specifically on reports. So these don't necessarily have to pull directly from Manage. Right? Once you've got Manage and you've got the reports, you just have to give it what the data set is. It has some wizards built in, of course, from Dassault to help do that for Manage, right? The Manage data wizard and so on, so that you can pull from, from the different BOM levels and all the information that Manage has available. But you can pull from other databases and grab other data as well. So if you've done any programming or anything where you're used to kind of selecting an element and then finding the properties and drilling down through all the various little settings, that's exactly how this is laid out. And there's tons of different controls charts, shapes, gauges, and then these can do calculations, because that's what these are doing. It's just a sum that's pulling in different variables, and you can format them to look any way you like. And then any changes that you make, you can then hit print preview, and it'll take you to that report to see what your changes look like. And then you go back and you hit save it and manage when you're done, and that's ready to go. You want to see a web page preview, there's a HTML as well. But these are hugely powerful, and BOMs are only one place where they're useful, but you can use reports for doing your change documents, project reporting, basically anything that's a record in here. You can create a report to output information. All right, thank you all for attending. You guys have a great rest of the day.